generation than they need. And they have that large surplus despite the fact that their electricity consumption per person in Quebec is the highest in the world. They use electricity very, very inefficiently because the price is so low in Quebec. And so we're making another point. Quebec can export to us, one, because they've got a surplus now, but two, they could make their exports even greater if they would invest in energy efficiency in Quebec to lower their domestic customers' bills. That would free up even more of their heritage hydro export capacity, so they could increase their total exports to Ontario and the United States and make even more money. So what we're just trying to emphasize is there's this huge potential for Quebec to export electricity to Ontario. There's a big potential right now, and they could increase that potential dramatically by improving their local energy efficiency.
Sounds like I appreciate a theoretical answer. Not sure about the practicality of it, although I get the theory, Mr. Gibbons, of what you've explained. And again, have you or any of Clean Air Alliance had any chats with Premier Marois and or the government of Quebec about, hey, if I can get some municipalities in the province of Ontario on side, you'll be open-minded to a deal, Mr. Chairman, through you to Jack?
No, unfortunately, I don't know the Premier of Quebec, and my French speaking is very, very poor. But, you know, Hydro-Quebec's an electric utility. They love to sell power. They need new markets. And the National Energy Board Act requires them to sell power to us at the same price they sell it to the Americans. So I think there's no question that if not me, but if Premier Wynne goes knocking on the Premier of Quebec's door, they'll be able to do a deal.
Thanks so much, Jack. Mr. Chairman, obviously for me, a few unanswered questions. I mean, obviously, bottom line, I'm all for lower costs of hydro bills to my constituents through Horizons and the 16 of us as shareholders. So absolutely, I'm all for that in theory. But obviously for me, there's some unanswered questions about full consultations with the various people that could make this happen. But thank you very much, Jack. Thanks Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Just before I go to Councillor Maruta for his motions, two quick questions, Jack. Number one is, what other municipalities have supported your resolution?
Pardon me?
What other municipalities has supported your resolution?
None yet. 4 other municipalities are studying it. St. Catharines, the town of Grimsby, the City of London, and the City of Toronto are asking their staffs to report back.
Okay, very similar to what Councillor Maruta is proposing today.
Yes.
Okay, and secondly, when you go to, I don't know who the decision-making authority is, whether it's Ontario Power Authority or Ontario Power Generation, with your logical ask, what's their answer to you?
Well, this is a political decision in the best sense of the word, and the decision is for the Premier of Ontario or the Minister of Energy.
But they'll take their advice from the Ontario Power Authority or Ontario Power Generation, will they not?
Well, I'm sure Premier Wynne will seek advice from many people, including those 2 companies, yes.
So you haven't gone to those 2 companies yet to get their reaction to your suggestion?
No.
Okay. Councillor Maruta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Collins, that staff be directed to review the Ontario Clean Air Alliance recommendation that the City of Hamilton request the Government of Ontario to enter into an electricity supply contract with Hydro-Quebec.
Discussion on that? Councillor Jackson?
Yeah.
It's being referred to staff?
That's correct. So that all stakeholders
report
would be
back
consulted.
to committee.
And
okay.
back
Horizons, all that? Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Whitehead?
I know this is public works, but I don't know if economic development, the City of Hamilton, has done any through their surveys and retention, talking to a lot of our industry and high electrical users, what the challenges and concerns on a go-forward basis is in Hamilton specifically. But I think in way of background, Mr. Chair, to understand those pressures as well, and maybe have it incorporated in a report would be helpful. So as a direction, I would suggest that we could at least make that request of economic development to provide that type of information if they have it.
I think staff can take that as direction from you, and so it would be part of the report that will come back to us from Public Works staff and Horizon. Okay, see no more speakers. All in favor of the motion? It's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you very much.
We'll go on now to presentations, as item 6.2 was cancelled. Niall Stedman, Manager, Central Fleet. You have a presentation for us on the Central Fleet. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation to Chair, Mr. Councillor Ferguson, and members of the Public Works Committee. I'm Lyle Stedman. I'm the Manager of Central Fleet for the City of Hamilton. And I'm really ecstatic this morning because I think for the first time in a long time the Ticats are going to the Grey Cup. That puts me in a very good mood. And we're hoping that they're going to be one of few who can beat Saskatchewan and take this thing home. So let's just start with a little bit about me, if I could, please. I'm Lyle Stedman, and I've been doing fleet management for the better part of my career. I started as a young man as a mechanic and saw a better advantage in managing fleets and managing business. Went back, got my business education, and on February 2012 was hired here to the City of Hamilton to take over control of the Central Fleet here. So what I'm going to do today is kind of take you through some of the things that I've seen in the couple of years I've been here, and sort of direct us towards where we're going to go in the future with Central Fleet, if I could. So this is where we are today. Central Fleet is a nucleus group that has a number of spokes that feed into it, and we feed back in and out of it. We consume a little more than 4.5 million liters of fuel, and that's just consider what I call the white fleet. So that's the roads, parks, forestry, cemeteries, those kinds of vehicles, both on and off road. And managing that, we have 190 different vehicle classes. So everything from our smallest of lawnmowers to our largest of roads building equipment. We do that through 58 employees, and we manage that through 9 separate garage locations, with our primary corporate location at 331 Wentworth Street. As an overview, we manage a large number of things. It's not just a matter of having a car and running it through the oil change service and driving it every day, and after 8 or so years when you're tired of it, going and buying another one. It's about managing the total business of fleet. So when you consider legislative compliance through to our on-demand and unplanned repairs. We also manage over 1,500 drivers, both seasonally and full-time. And we look at those drivers and their performance and their compliance to their driver's license. We look at that quarterly. So we run 1,500 separate driver's abstracts and review each one of those quarterly. Again, a network of shops, they're all interconnected. We have a database that connects them all so we can manage the workflow in and out of those shops at any given time. And some of the largest challenges we have is continually finding fit-for-purpose vehicles and continually to find them in a competitive market. But we strive to do that every day, and we work very closely with our user groups to redefine the term fit for purpose and to try and find better utilization of our fleet year-round. We're also looking at the disposal process again. We have a challenge with our fleet reserve, and part of that challenge is to improve our overall disposal returns. So then that includes challenging what we're currently doing and determining whether or not we're realizing our best benefit from using our current auction process, or whether we need to find some other method and model. So we're in the middle of challenging that right now. So we just went through and looked at all of our legislative compliance requirements. The legislation around managing a fleet is a little larger than simply buying a driver's license and putting a sticker on the car. Because we have a lot of heavyweight vehicles, and we manage a lot of vehicles that carry heavy loads and or pull and tow other equipment, we have a number of legislative issues that we have to satisfy. So the Highway Traffic Act is our governing document. It tells us what we can and can't do and how we have to manage that fleet over the road. And underneath that Highway Traffic Act is our Commercial Vehicle Operator Safety Registration, so our CVOR. And that CVOR is basically our scorecard for how well we're doing. We'll talk a little bit about that coming up. We also have to concern ourselves with our Occupational Health and Safety Act compliance when managing our fleet. What about ingress and egress of the vehicles? How can our staff sit in them ergonomically? How can they manage the controls ergonomically? What are the pinch points? What are the slips, trips, and falls hazards in the vehicle? We have to work with the user group to try and manage that so that we minimize our WSIB-related claims. Accident investigation is a large one. We work closely with risk, and where there is on-road accidents or vehicular accidents or third-party damage, then we're involved quite closely through our driver training group and through our user supervisors to investigate those accidents, report on them, and then deal appropriately with staff retraining and or third-party damage. Again, the driver's license monitoring review is a large part of the program. We also support that and supplement that with our driver certification program, which is a provincial defined program that outlines what training, what requirements the drivers have to have, license upgrades, and how we manage those things. And that is a certified program. So we bring all that together, tie it all together through our central fleet policy and our driver safety manual. And prior to this year, those two manuals were separate, and they did not link each other, they did not tie to each other. So in the central fleet policy, we talked about driver's licenses. In the driver safety policy, we did not link the central fleet policy. So we looked at rewriting those policies, and we're bringing them together to tie the two policies, to link them together so there's less documentation, but stronger areas of enforcement and opportunity to manage the fleet and drivers. So the fleet policy covers all of these topics up here, from the assignment of a city vehicle. So how do you get one when you're assigned one? What do you have to do to maintain the right to have that privilege? All the way through to our safe operation of our fleet, including maintenance, care and control, driver rehabilitation, and disposal processes. So despite all of those things, we do have a number of great successes. So we are driving ourselves in the right direction. So in 2012, we looked at our waste collection fleet, and we sat down with the user group, and they brought together a plan where they were looking at to buy 21 waste collection vehicles, and they had a budgeted amount of $4.5 million to do that. Considering the impact of the fleet reserve and the potential for not being able to properly fund that fleet, we went back to them and said, is that the truth? Do you need 21? Do they have to be built in that configuration? We need you to revisit this detail. So we sat down with our fleet planning group. We looked at their criteria. We looked at the fit for purpose design of the trucks. We looked at what chassis we truly needed. And from that, we were able to save over $2 million. We put 16 trucks on the road instead of 21, and we bought them for considerably less money due to the economies of scale we were able to get from that purchase. So that was a very good success on the fleet planning group. Our commercial vehicle operators registration is our scorecard. So we're out on the road every day. If we have an incident, we have an accident, we have a driver infraction, we have third-party damage. For class of vehicles of a certain weight class and above, this commercial vehicle operators registration is the safety card for that damage. We get a report on that monthly, and that report tells us how well we're doing, tells us if we're too high, if we're too low. If we exceed the threshold limits, the stratified threshold limits that the province sets out, they send us a notice of infraction, and then they come and sit in our desks and they go through our audit process with them. So a year ago, we identified that safety rating at 73.2%. We've received a slap on the hand from the Ministry of Transportation. They had notified us that they were going to change our safety rating and that we were going to have to go in front of them and explain why our safety rating was so high. So from that, we took and developed a plan and a process that reduced that safety rating. We went and met with them. We identified how the plan was going to work, what we were going to do. We engaged a CVR remediation committee, which was all of the managers of the user groups, and we sat down with them and identified how we were going to correct the CVR. And a year later, I was pleased to say, we're down to 48.1%. We received recognition from the Ministry of Transportation on our successes. We're currently floating around 51, 52%, and as we go through the winter, we expect it to rise because of just strictly the weather impact from that. But because they're already low, we're hoping to be able to manage that below 55%. Outsourced expenditures. In 2011, our outsourced maintenance expenditures were a little over $3 million. In 2012, our outsourced expenditures were about $2.6 million, so we were able to reduce that by about $500,000, just from strictly monitoring, watching, asking more questions, being more involved with our client group and our outsourced vendor contracts, building a stronger relationship, setting firm targets, threshold spending limits before they had to call us to get approval to do the repairs. Golf operations in 2011, the golf operations spent a little over $320,000 repairing their fleet. So they came to us and challenged us on that. So we looked at how we managed that, what programs we implemented, how we did our off-season rebuilds, how we did our in-season maintenance, and we were able to reduce that down at the end of 2012 to just a little over $220,000. So that's $100,000 savings from doing those things. One of the big benefits in all that, we've actually added staffing to our afternoon shifts, both at 330 Wentworth Street and Rymal Road, and we're able to offer off-peak service for the fleet at an enhanced basis. So we're now working on the fleet when the fleet is not required to be on the road, as opposed to trying to struggle it at the same time they're working. So we're going to hopefully expand on that opportunity as we go forward. Green Fleet Program. So our Green Fleet Program is a great measure of our successes. We did a lot of great things with that from starting in 2006 through to date. We've had, we started in the program was in its infancy when we stepped into it. It was a challenging program for everyone to look at. The OEMs were trying to do it, but they weren't really interested in it. The City of Hamilton, along with the City of Toronto and other municipalities in Canada, they jumped in and made a commitment to show the manufacturers that this is a viable market and we can deliver on this market, and it is a good service market for fleets. So from 2006 to 2012, you can see we have a lot of great successes out of that. Vehicles that normally would have traveled at about 13 to 14 liters per 100K are down around 9.5 or 9.7 liters per 100K. So it was a challenging market. The unfortunate part of that is the cost of it was quite high. We'll talk about that in a minute. So technology is now moving away from that. The OEs are looking at this market and saying it's a viable market. We're seeing electric charging stations going in. We're seeing an increased interest in the consumer market. So they're moving those vehicles towards the consumer entry level and consumer high-end market. You can see now Lincoln, Lexus, all those high-end cars are offering a hybrid option, as well as there's an awful great increase at the consumer level for the smaller cars. So we were great leaders in that area. But again, the technology is changing. That market is moving away from our fit-for-purpose criteria. We're finding less opportunities available to our class of vehicles. So now we have to look at other options. So where we continue to look and challenge manufacturers on the light fleet to continue to provide those hybrid and or plug-in hybrid vehicles, we're also looking at where we can make some of our biggest impacts. So a dump truck or an aerial truck or a snow plow or a sander, something of that nature, would have a large fuel consumption for the same route that a small vehicle travels. If we can find a way to offset that fuel consumption and offset that greenhouse gas emission, then we need to look at that. So right now, hybrid aerial trucks are one thing that we're looking at. We can run the aerial device solely off of battery power. We do not need to idle the truck. Each one of those trucks idles about 200 hours a year on the PTO. So there's a complete elimination of fuel possible from there. We're starting to look at it from a traffic standpoint first, because that's the market that the business currently is interested in. And if it proves to be there, we're going to look and see if we can move it into the forestry aerials as well. Both aerials work entirely differently, so it might not be viable in one where it is in the other. So we have to diversify that as well. We want to look at compressed natural gas. We're starting to investigate the net benefit of that market for our waste collection fleet. Right now, every other waste contractor out there, very positive, very big into compressed natural gas and its net cost savings, and then the greenhouse gas reduction. We currently aren't there, but we're going to bring that review forward shortly, I hope. So the Green Fleet plan then has to move away from the plan of technology-based solutions into an overall plan of what solutions are best fit which market that we're in and best fit of which fleet we're in. And so we're going to look at that as an overall contribution to a greenhouse reduction strategy as opposed to individual technologies, so we don't lock ourselves to one option. The fleet reserve. So the fleet reserve currently is struggling. I think we've identified that in recent years and in past history here. It continues to struggle. Central Fleet continues to incorporate coping mechanisms to try and reduce the impacts on the fleet reserve and to try and ensure that we have capital funds available to replace the capital assets as we need. So we're looking at a number of things. So in this year, we're considering rebuilding some of the fleet as opposed to replacing it. There could be $300,000 or $400,000 in savings from that program. We're looking at how do we design these vehicles for full year use? What's the best option to do that? We're hopefully going to have some answers on some of that very quickly, particularly in the areas of salt management and utilizing that vehicle also for asphalt, where the asphalt damages the salt distribution system and the salt distribution system is not strong enough to survive under hot asphalt. So one of the largest coping mechanisms we had, as we said to the user group, until we can resolve the funding issues, right now, we can't ask you to spend any more than you contribute. So if you haven't contributed $5 million and you want to spend $5 million, we're going to ask you to rethink that. And we're going to challenge you to go back and find a way to manage your fleet expenses and or change your fit for purpose criteria, find smaller vehicles to do the job with. We're challenging those past strategies, and so far we're being quite successful in some of those areas. Again, our disposal program continues to be a focus for us. We're trying to get 10% of the original purchase price back as a disposal price at the end of the life cycle's asset. That we're being challenged on that. It's not quite successful yet. So you can't manage a fleet without good and accurate data. Right now we have a standalone database. We're the only people in North America that use this database to manage its fleet. It's known as Advantis. It's highly restrictive. It was a plant maintenance strategy that was modified to adapt to fleet maintenance. The history of it, we're not sure how it arrived here or what the model was behind it, but it has outlived its practicality. So we looked at a number of items that we could replace them with. All of them bore very high costs. And really what we need is our core fleet data. We need to start establishing some KPIs. We need to start looking at operating cost per kilometer, fuel consumption, utilization, things of that nature. We currently have a corporate policy or corporate strategy called Hansen. Hansen has a fleet maintenance module which is in use in a number of municipalities around North America, and our references show that to be quite successful. So we're going to move in to that model. It's going to give us a chance to better control some of our procurement and our purchasing processes to ensure that our policy levels are reduced and our contracts are enhanced, and also to look at our operating costs and tie that to end user fleet utilization. So we're hopefully going to have some improvement in our data. Better data means better decisions. Service delivery review. We were identified as one of the top 10 solutions that could be realized from further pursuing the opportunities in the service delivery review. So several opportunities were highlighted during that review. Obviously, reserve alternative funding models for the fleet reserve. As I said, it's under pressures, the same as much other budgets are, but they seem to be quite higher. They asked for fleet to be a competitive business. What is our internal door rate? What do we charge? What services do we provide? Can we buy those services less expensive outside? What is our current parts management strategy? What is our current order fill rate? What's the value of our inventory? How fast does it provide service to our mechanics, and how fast can we get the vehicle out? And basically review of our overall vehicle use. How many vehicles are being used for 100% of the time? How many at 60%? How many at less than 50%? And is there an opportunity to change that? And is there a restriction because historically they're no longer fit for purpose? Do we need to change those vehicles? Fleet had some expectations. A number of them mirrored the findings from KPMG. We were looking for reserve funding options. How do we continue to do business if we can't continue to replace all the fleet in its current life cycle and reduce the impact to operating budgets? What about the number of locations? Does that make sense? We're in 9 locations now. Is that practical? Does it make sense to be in 9 locations? Is 4 locations better? Is 1 location better? What's the lowest possible cost without impacting service to our clients? So we're looking at opportunities to revise those service offerings that we currently have. Do we need to do everything, or can we outsource only part of it? Parts and inventory controls, are we doing the right thing? Are we managing our inventory to the best possible levels? Is our inventory turns working properly for us? Do we have the correct number of staff to manage 9 locations? Biggest one for us, of course, is the aging workforce and recruitment impacts. Being mechanics, it's a very physically demanding job, and we're seeing a lot of knee, foot, hip, lower back injuries starting to rise, shoulders, repetitive strain injuries are starting to rise in our industry, and we're starting to see that in the city of Hamilton. We have a number of hours missing due to injury, and we have to be involved fairly heavily with our return to work program. So we're trying to figure out how we're going to manage that aging workforce. There's less of an interest to be involved in a trade, more of an interest to be involved in the electronic and digital world. So we're having less recruits entering the market. And overall, we were hoping to review the general organizational structure. Does it make sense to be in as many businesses as we're in, or is there an opportunity to be in less and still manage the fleet properly? So KPMG came back with their interim report in October 18, 2013. They've looked at a depreciation analysis for the fleet reserve. They did also, again, identify it as not sustainable in its current model. and that they also identified the current coping mechanisms we have. While they may be sustainable to maintain the fleet, they're not sustainable from an operating budget standpoint. The older the fleet is, and the harder we push it, and the more ground we try to cover, and the faster we try to cover that ground, the more likelihood of failures as the fleet ages. So they're saying that those methods we're using now probably are not sustainable. So they've offered some funding options. We've asked them to go back and review those funding options. We had some questions, and we wanted them to make a recommendation as to which ones we should consider on a 1, 2, 3 priority basis. So fleet is a competitive business. That continues to be a work in progress. Right now, the report is coming back to us again with motherhood statement options, and so we're going to have to do some work on those statements and try and understand what our costs are now and what would be our costs if we changed our current service model. And our parts and inventory opportunities, that continues to be a work in progress, whether or not we should outsource any part of that or some of it, or whether we should go to a faster just-in-time inventory delivery system, or whether we should expand our opportunities in that area and take better control of it. So a year ago, we had some concerns from our user groups, and they said that they felt that Central Fleet was not fully understanding their demands, their needs. We were not providing a viable service to them, and they needed to have a better working relationship with us. So we put together a task team work group to look at our current policies and our current workflow methodologies, and we rewrote a number of those policies to better improve our relationship with the user group. And they were all driven from the standpoint of service delivery to our user clients. So our preventative maintenance master schedule, when do we review it? When do we get it out? How do we execute the repairs once we have the vehicle in the building? What are the thresholds, spending limit thresholds that we can engage in? How do we manage our tire repairs? Tire repairs continues to be a large expense for the City of Hamilton, about $600,000 a year. And how do we better manage that? How do we track our casings? How do we track our tire tread wear? That sort of thing. How do we go about continuing to replace our units? How do we find that fit for purpose and year-round criteria? How do we manage it when there's service level changes mid-life of the vehicle? And how do we go about helping them with that process? Warranty determination, where can we go back and how often do we go back? And how hard do we press to ensure we continue to get warranty for a vehicle or a fleet where we have a commitment to provide low cost and the vehicle fails or starts to fail early in its life? So we've gone back and looked at that. And then, of course, when there is a dispute, how do we resolve it? What levels are involved in what areas of the business unit to get those resolved? So those 6 programs, 6 policies are in place now. All of the staff have been trained on it, and we're all engaged in communicating better and better timelines and better working arrangements. That pretty much brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for letting me speak. I'd be willing to take questions if there are any.
Well, thanks, Now. $600,000 in tires is a lot of money.
It is a lot of money. Yes, it is.
I appreciate the update, and I have a long speakers list, and we'll start with Councillor McCaddy.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and Lyle, very impressive presentation. Thanks for doing that.
Thank you very much.
I just had some questions. Under I guess slide 6, Central Fleet successes. I wasn't sure if I quite understood the commercial vehicle operations registration safety rating. It's like good news coming down from 73.2 down to 48, maybe around 50, target of 55, no more than 55. I wasn't quite sure what that meant, how you measure that, number of accidents or something, and 55% might seem like a high number to someone who, like me, who doesn't know the system like you do. So a little bit more about what it is and what you measure, and then why it wouldn't be down at 0 or whatever other number you might choose. Mr. Chair, through you.
Yeah, that's a great question. The commercial vehicle operators registration, the ideal rating under the Ministry of Transportation is 30% or less. So if your carrier safety rating is 30% or less, then you're never going to raise a red flag with them. The calculation for the safety rating is based on distance driven versus fleet size. So where we have a fairly large fleet size, even though we have a large municipality overall, our distance driven is only about 5.5 million kilometers a year in that fleet. So if you consider a highway hauler fleet that would do 150 million revenue miles in a year with 1,300 pieces, we're only doing 5.5 million. We're exposed in extremely heavy traffic areas. So a 50% rating is an excellent rating for that, considering those impacts. We're, of course, still striving now to get it down under 35%. That's the challenge out there to the user groups. And it's basically, it is just that, is how are you managing your fleet? How are you reducing your infractions, your accidents, and your on-road incidents every day that you're on the road?
Okay, thanks for that explanation. Just sort of maybe a personal interest, the golf course. Golf courses, plural. It's my sense that most golf courses, private golf courses, have gone to an electric fleet for golf carts. I guess I'm thinking about particularly versus diesel. Is there a business case for that? Is that something you're looking at, Mr. Chair, through you?
We're not engaged in the golf cart market. We're looking at the golf care equipment, so our lawn and turf equipment. That's what our focus is. I'm not sure how the golf cart market is managed in Hamilton. It's my understanding it's contract service, but I'm not sure fully on that. So we're just looking at the maintenance equipment.
And Mr. Chair, I think during our budget process, the preview of our operating budget so far, we haven't really got into much detail on that yet, but I think there was something in there that I remember seeing that the number of kilometers that we're traveling is going up, and that would be a budget impact. So you use more fuel, a number of kilometers. But I see on slide 7, you've got the overall fuel consumption is reduced by 4 liters per 100 kilometers driven, based on the hybrids and other green fleet aspects. So can you touch on the relationship there? If I'm right, if I remember correctly, a number of kilometers are going up, which was a concern to me. And I was going to ask questions like, is there a way to make that a no net increase, understanding that we're a big city and we're traveling out to the extremities of the city, so more kilometers. But other folks may not need to travel that much within the city, so we want to limit the kilometers they go. Just understanding the dynamic there, and then the fuel consumption comment you've made here, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. So the kilometer use is based on the whole of the fleet, which I understand includes fire and transit as well, fire EMS and transit as well as police. So I can't speak on those kilometer distances that they would drive. But as we try to improve our service levels, you got to put vehicles on the road more often, so our kilometerage will increase. Hopefully that reduces some of our idle time. Maybe our fuel consumption will go down because we're driving more and stopping less. As far as the small fleet goes, we did save $87,000 in fuel over per unit or per year, over 127 units. So our fleet is 1,350 units large. So we're kind of looking at our other technologies moving into our heavier fleets. Even though we're driving larger distances, we're going to be able to reduce some of our fuel expense by changing the type of fuel that we use, enhancing further use of hybrids in a heavier market, and perhaps moving to compressed natural gas, which is considerably less expensive than diesel fuel is.
So look for that in the budget process to try and understand that. It wasn't clear to me what part of the fleet was being talked about in the budget, so it may not be your area. But I was a little bit alarmed to see in the Green Fleet Program section here, it was comments about used in the past and were in sort of a past tense, but I think you explained that quite well, that where the hybrid business is going is more in the residential or in individual use versus commercial use, and there's not as many options maybe as there used to be for municipality, and that is driving you to look at other ways to save fuel rather than just the fleet itself. Did I understand your comments correctly on that, Mr.
Yes,
Chair?
that is exactly the nature of the comments, for sure.
So that's a good explanation on that. And I was glad to see you raise the service delivery review. That was certainly a question I was going to have, because we haven't heard much since that was brought up a year ago. And I know there's still lots of work to be done on that. Is there any possibilities for savings in this year's budget that we're going into just now, Mr. Chair?
I don't see those opportunities yet, because the depth of work that's going to be required to better understand where we need to take Central Fleet as a whole of a department, and then where the user groups are going to have to take their operation and how to reduce their expenses. So I think there's a lot more work to be done before we can actually see a budget reduction or any kind of impact to the budget. Some of the solutions that they're offering will not be a reduction to the budget. Any change in modeling on the current financing may have a negative impact to the budget. So we haven't understood that yet, but we're working further on that.
Thanks very much for your work, Lyle.
Thank you very much.
Well, Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and through you to Lyle. Lyle, the $2.6 million in savings that you had up there as part of the fleet success stories, those dollars, when we achieve savings across the organization, they don't reflect a savings in fleet. Would those savings be reflected then in the operating budgets of the respective departments who are part of that initiative?
Where we reduced outsourced expenditures and repair costs, yes. Where we reduced the capital expenditure, that's just minimizing the impact to the fleet reserve. So we still contribute to the reserve at the full level of from all operating budgets. So all we did is just lessen the impact in that area.
Okay, but I thought the process we have in place is one in which the operating departments contribute through their operating budget to the reserve. Is that not the case?
That's correct. That is the case. They do. They were asking to spend more than they had contributed. So we were looking to find a way to avoid having to draw from other contributions or other areas of the reserve from other departments who contributed. We're also looking to replace fleet in that year. So this is just one of the tools that we're using to cope with the current reserve balance and trying to prevent it from going into a negative funding model.
Okay. And that was one of the next questions I had as it relates to the reserve. Prior to your time in the position that you're in, we've always struggled with it seems like since amalgamation, we've struggled, through you, Mr. Chairman, with the whole issue of our fleet reserve. We had an operational review undertaken, I think, just after amalgamation, and it was on their radar screen at the time, speaking to the issue that it's underfunded and it's not sustainable in terms of supporting the new purchases that come through all areas of the organization. When will we be in a position when will we be at a stage or a point in time where we can say definitively that we've solved the issue of funding? And I thought I heard that, again, it's being looked at again, but I think if we go back to past terms of council, through successive years, you'll find that this has always been an issue, and we never seem to reach the finish line in terms of some kind of an answer that seems to solve the problem of the fleet reserve contributions. Through you.
So I obviously don't have that answer today, because if I did, we'd be solving it. But we are looking hopefully at the suggestions from KPMG through the service delivery review as to methods that are going to resolve this funding dilemma that we face every day. Currently, we're basically saying that if you want to save it, you just don't spend it. And that's the model that we're currently using. Finance is going to have to be involved to look at the other models and the impact of the operating and budgets and the reserve. So we're trying to right now just to sustain. We're hoping that KPMG is going to come up with some solutions, and we've had some very positive feedback from them on what models we should be considering and using for that. So I think that in the coming months you're going to see that solution. It's just whether or not we can manage that solution as well, I guess, is the question that'll remain. So.
And from that, I take it that some areas of the organization, some departments are paying sufficiently into the reserve to recover their capital costs, and others are not. Have we identified yet what areas of the organization or what divisions and departments are not paying the full cost of replacement?
Currently, it would fall under the Public Works division. So all of the departments falling under Public Works, with the exception of water and wastewater, are not paying the full contribution to the reserve. So they're not paying 100% of the depreciation of each asset. So the funding model is, though, do we need to replace every asset every year? Do we have some that are seasonal that don't need to be replaced? So we have to always answer those questions when we consider that, whether or not we need to fully fund 100% of the reserve or depreciation or not.
Okay. My next question, and maybe it's unfair to ask you, Lyle, because you're a part of this, the group, but maybe it's a better question for Jerry, but I've never understood the fact that we have as many fleet departments as we have. You have Central Fleet, I think it's labeled. The fire department has their own fleet staff. The police department has their own fleet staff. HSR doesn't fall into Central Fleet, does it? Or they have their own?
Their non-revenue vehicles fall under. We manage the repair process for them, and then they come and partner up with us for the replacement of those non-revenue stuff.
And I'm not certain if there's one other one, but it just boggles my mind to know that we've operated as long as we have with these separate silos and organizations, all, in the same business. And there seems to be, at least on the surface, when we go through the budget process and we look at the org charts and everything else, for as many reorgs that we've been through in this organization, for whatever reason, we've never looked at merging we've never looked to find efficiencies in possibly merging one or all of the fleet components. And I understand in some cases, they're very specialized equipment, so there's no doubt in my mind that a sander and a salter is different than a large fire truck. But there are certainly other components of the business, whether it's through purchasing, whether it's just the sheer management of the employees, or other aspects of their business. The fact that we have 4 fleet divisions and departments in different parts of the organization, I think, is problematic. So it may be unfair to ask to you, but Mr. Chairman, maybe through you to Jerry, are there opportunities for us to look at what opportunities exist?
Through the chair, and I'm going to defer to Jeff here too. I've already put him on the spot. The KPMG service delivery review is to look at all the fleet. The one thing we definitely did not want to be part of it is HSR, and Don can explain the importance of the bus and the driver for that type of business. Previously, it was part of Central Fleet, and the buses were broken out, and Don has shown the efficiencies through that. The KPMG review, and this is where I'll ask Jeff, I don't know if it did initially say to look at the police and the other emergency service groups or not. And our biggest issue has been our reserve contribution for replacing the sanders, the packers, the plows, and everything. And what KPMG, what I've seen initially, it starts us down the right road. So I don't know, Jeff, can you give regarding the part of it? Thanks.
Through you, Mr. Chair. With the service delivery review, we just focused on Central Fleet. Police operate in their own way, and the same with fire. I think the synergies come into play in the future when Lyle mentioned a little bit earlier about how we're in 9 different locations right now, and ideally we'd like to be in something less, but we have to keep in mind servicing the operations. But as we grow and we change locations in the future, I think there should be some opportunities to tag team with, at the very least, with fire and EMS in terms of maybe joint facilities when some of our older facilities get a little bit tired and are due for replacement.
But it sounds like I thought I heard you say the KPMG review does not include the other fleet departments. It's basically a Central Fleet investigation at this point in time.
That's correct.
And see, just using the 600,000 we spend on tires in a calendar year, I mean, you start to add then what the police are purchasing and some of the other departments, and it stands to reason that even with bulk purchasing, that there are savings to be had in merging even some of the simple tasks that come with managing one or all of those fleet departments. Even just incorporating the police fleet into our fleet purchases for our own trucks and cars that we have in our inventory, it just stands to reason that there are savings to be had, and I've never been able to figure out the reluctance in terms of even looking at that. And so if it means that we need some direction, and I understand that the police are separate from us in terms of legislation and oversight and control, but at least to have those discussions to say, look, you're purchasing X amount of tires, we're purchasing tires, if we merge those 2 purchases together, are we going to get a better price? And that's just something I put on the table as, I'm sure there are half a dozen to a dozen other ones that someone can think of, but I've never understood it. And sorry, Jeff, I think you were going to say something.
Through you, Mr. Chair. In some cases, we do look for opportunities to look for synergies, and tires is one of them. We certainly do that with HSR on the tires. The bus fleet that HSR has, we do coordinate and service those vehicles. So some of that does happen.
Does it happen with police and fire right now?
Not with police and fire.
Sorry, just to interrupt. This year, our tire contract includes the tires for the whole fleet, so we're just reviewing that contract now. We're just going to award it. We do have the some of the business in there for fire. We don't have it for HSR because they run a different tire program because of the distance that they drive. So, but we do have the tires in there for all of the fleet, including EMS and police. And in our battery contract, where we're buying batteries, we did find synergies in there by grouping that together. So we do have some interdepartment corporate contracts that are indeed taking advantage of the full economies of scale, for sure.
You mentioned earlier, Lyle, through your presentation, that you have a working group that meets regularly with the internal operating departments to talk about some of the service delivery issues that come up from time to time. Are the police and fire reps as well as HSR at that table as well, or just the
Yes.
HSR?
Yeah, we extend the invitation out. So it's called the Central Fleet Advisory Committee, and we extend the invitation to all fleet users at the time. HSR is not included in that because their business is remotely different from ours in that the transportation of people and the nature and configuration of the bus and how they operate their business is different. And they have a lot of contracts or relationship with Metrolinx, which is giving them some economies of scale that we can't compete against. So there are differences there, but we do invite police and fire to the table. And while they can't come to every meeting because of business pressures, they have been there for a number. And clearly, when we're trying to merge contracts, they do provide us with their input for those contracts, their utilization, the usage, what their current specifications are.
So the nature, through you, Mr. Chairman, the nature of your business compared to HSR is almost completely different. However, I'm led to believe that, certainly tool purchases, clothing purchases that you have for staff, are there synergies there that you're already taking advantage of?
Our clothing purchases was done collectively with HSR, so all of our shop coveralls and all of our shop rags and those things we're taking advantage of. We take advantage of fuel purchases because we buy for the whole of the city. We take advantage of our oil and lubricant purchases so we can buy for all of the city. So we do have some synergies amongst all of the departments, and we all sit and talk together collectively. So it's a pretty good working relationship, even though it isn't currently under one central management function.
And I'm certain that there are, even from a staffing perspective, there are 4 different management levels for those 4 different fleet departments, and that in itself, I think, for council's consideration as part of the budget process should be something that's looked at. Those are my questions, Mr. Chairman. Look, I've never been able to figure it out. I'm going to come forward with a motion that seeks to ask staff to look at that. I understand the complex nature of some of the businesses where the vehicles are completely different than others that are offered with other services, so I get that. But it just seems like we've taken baby steps all along the way to find some of these synergies, and it's good to hear that over the last couple of years we've started to, as you mentioned, bulk purchase with some of our partners, but I think there's still some additional opportunities for savings, and I'll come back to the committee maybe with a motion that seeks to ask staff to come back with a look at a central fleet service that might look at all of the fleet departments under one umbrella. But I'll certainly speak to staff, Don and Jerry and Jeff and others to make sure that the wording is something that they're all comfortable with. But I don't think we've ever had the investigation, and the fact that KPMG is just looking at central fleet, I think in itself on the surface shows that we still don't have one unified fleet voice. So anyway, those are my questions, and I thank Lyle for the answer.
Thank you. And just for clarity to Councillor Collins' question, the $600,000 in savings operation, by the way, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Will we see that in the Public Works presentation then, a reduction of $600,000 in maintenance?
Those services were reductions in our direct chargebacks to the user groups. So I'm hoping that the user groups are going to step forward and identify that we were able to do that for them. So we
should be looking for that then at the Public Works presentation. Okay, thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
I also wouldn't mind looking at best practices. I mean, the province of Ontario, for example, has a huge fleet component to it, and I'm not sure if it's all siloed like it is here in Hamilton, or if in fact it's a central fleet organization, and then they have the distribution throughout the different silos, but it's more centralized model than it is here in Hamilton. So I'm not sure if that's the case, but I think we need to look at best practice. So I do agree and concur with Councillor Collins. I mean, I heard HSR, for example, they have special needs, but they still have supervisory vehicles. I heard you indicate that the non-revenue vehicles are part of the central fleet. Is that correct?
We work in synergy with HSR to replace those, yeah. So HSR owns them, they pay for them out of their funds, but they piggyback on our maintenance model and, of course, on our fuel.
Pull up slide 8. How many of our vehicles are all-wheel drive in our fleet? What percentage?
I couldn't give you that percentage off the top of my head, but I'd be willing to report that back to you.
Would it be safe to say the picture here reflects all-wheel drive vehicles?
No, a good portion of those Escapes are two-wheel drive vehicles. There are a percentage of those, so that is the Escape class of vehicle looking at. That's typically our hybrid class that we've been so successful with in the past, and there's an even mix. So construction inspection, for instance, or municipal bylaw where they have to be out in all weather conditions and or perhaps do some off-roading, they may have some all-wheel drives, but a large portion of this fleet is two-wheel drive.
I appreciate that, because I would suggest that if it was all-wheel drive, then maybe it's a reflection of our confidence in our snow removal in the community of Hamilton. The reason I asked that, so the next step, of course, is, and I see that you had some savings on the maintenance side. And I worked in the mining industry, and I can clearly tell you that the experience is there in regards to maintenance, in the way, the type of vehicles, the length of time you keep the vehicles. Newer vehicles, obviously lower maintenance at the beginning. You got a bit of a warranty period. So I want to focus on the warranty piece first. Has there been any changes in the warranty periods with fleet when you purchase new vehicles?
That would depend on the class of vehicle. We've seen some reductions in the heavy duty fleet and some reductions in warranty in the manufactured equipment that's bolted on the back. For instance, our current waste packer fleet carries a 1-year chassis warranty and a 1-year body warranty, where in the past we've been able to see perhaps 36 months on the chassis. Our small fleet still carries that same 36-month warranty, so we haven't seen any reduction in those areas. So it depends on the asset that you're buying and what the OE offers.
So have we done an assessment in regards to the changes in the warranty period with some of the suppliers relative to the and be able to quantify what the cost is, additional cost is to the city?
No, we haven't done that work.
The next question I have is, we talked about hybrid, and we know that hybrid is more, it's certainly newer in regards to experience, and as we know, anything new usually has a higher maintenance cost to it. Has that been our experience?
Not with the light-duty hybrid fleet we've had in the Escape class of vehicles. It was our experience with the pickup trucks. They did experience a very high failure rate through transmission and through the electric drive component. It was covered for, the hybrid portion was covered as part of an extended warranty for up to 5 years, but the transmission carried the standard 36-month warranty. So we did have some trouble in that area. Those vehicles aren't being offered to us right now, and the manufacturers aren't building those hybrid class of vehicles and pickup trucks right now.
When do we bulk buy parts?
We do bulk buy parts, yes.
Okay. Do we do special orders for parts?
We do special orders as well.
How often do we do special orders to the chair? Do we have any idea?
I don't have an idea of what our order fill rate is right at the moment, but as a result of the KPMG service delivery review, we've gone back to revisit that. We're trying to get a handle on that now. How effective is our inventory? What is our current order fill rate from inventory? So we're hoping I have some confidence it's going to be high, but we've yet to see that number. So.
Okay, and the reason, again, I asked that, the experience, certainly in the mining industry, is that when they created a LMPT, so they had the actual frontline workers looking at ways to save dollars in regards to the fleet, and they had determined that there's a number of special orders that was costing 3 times what it would have cost by just going to Maslack down the street and picking up the bearing. So I'm concerned about how we and how often we do the special orders, and whether we've done a cost assessment on those special orders relative to what is out there in the market.
So our special order volume would basically be those unique pieces of equipment that we have. So the specific components that would make up the sander body or the dump body, things of that nature. Where we have an OE requirement for our basic service, our standard brake application, our filters, our hoses, those sorts of things. We don't special order that. We do inventory those things. And we inventory those basically just to maintain a fast turnaround on the equipment. I don't want to tie it up while we're waiting for brake shoes and drums and that sort of stuff. Bearings are, we try to do that as much as we can. Bearings are a generic application. Once you have a bearing manufacturer number, you can source it from any one of the current vendors that we have approved under our purchasing contract. And we typically go to our known lowest cost vendor and try to find that bearing first before we go to the OE and special order it.
And there's usually a carrying cost when you purchase an inventory. A carrying cost. So have we determined whether we got the right balance in regards to our inventory versus the carrying cost?
We're hoping that the KPMG model is going to provide some of that information for us. We're really unclear as to whether or not we do have the correct carrying costs, what our inventory turns are right now, and whether we have the correct staff to be able to maintain that or improve on it. So those are things we're hoping to get out of the review.
We also looked at the technology, there's a terminology for it, and I fail to recall what's called, but almost like just-in-time type system in regards to the types of parts that you would expect based on life cycle.
So that would be an automatic reorder based on min-max levels in the inventory, and we do manage that through that right now. We don't just allow it to automatically go out. We want to monitor it. Because over time, as we dispose of vehicles, that min-max, we could be putting parts in inventory in the last year of a vehicle's life cycle and not intending to use them and then having to dispose of them in the year end. So we're always managing around that automatic reorder to make sure that we do truly need those parts on the shelf.
Okay, I guess my last question is, there are vehicles that are bought for a specific purpose, and then for whatever reason, adequacy or standards or so forth, it no longer can serve that particular purpose, but it certainly could fit in a different category and still provide a service at another level. So we've looked at the flexibility and utilization of some of the vehicles to, again, extend the length of time that we can have that vehicle within our fleet.
Absolutely. That's one of the largest factors we have in maintaining a long life cycle without getting into early replacements, things of that nature. For instance, I'm sure you all know we have a smart car. That smart car has come to the end of its fit for purpose for that department. We're currently now shopping that car out to other departments. We've just gone through a couple of rebuilds on some of our one-ton high mileage units. We put some engines in and done some work there as opposed to replacing them in year 4 of a 6-year life cycle. So we shop those vehicles back out to the market to other departments to take them on. So we're able to do those things for sure.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And Lyle, never want to discourage staff, especially at your level, from coming forward with plans and reports that seem to be taking us in the right direction. So let me just preamble. I've got a few questions myself, but I don't want you going back after today kind of feeling like, let somebody else bring that report forward next time. You're going in the right direction. I know I appreciate it, and but obviously still some questions that are somewhat head-scratching. So, Mr. Chairman, I want to join the chorus along with Councillor Collins in terms of trying to understand the centralization of fleet. I mean, it just seems to be a hodgepodge, and every department just has their own fleet services. So even the calling of this Central Fleet Public Works Committee, it's kind of a misnomer because even HSR isn't included. So just go back to your very second slide, please, Lyle, if you would, just so that I'm clear, since Councillor Collins has raised this. 1,350 assets. That is just what makes up that, please?
So that is the typically the groundskeeping equipment, anything to do with sidewalks, waste collection fleet, roads fleet, wastewater, and water fleet. That would include bylaw, building inspection services. So all of those city core function departments, if you think of a city providing services to its residents on managing the roads and the infrastructure, it's that fleet.
So waste trucks, snow graders,
yes,
plows that we own, vans, all that stuff. That's what falls into there. But what doesn't fall into there, what I've learned, is HSR doesn't, including non-buses. I'm curious. They must have, obviously, vehicles that aren't buses, per se, right? They don't even fall under this 1,350, Mr. Chairman?
No, they purchase those vehicles themselves in conjunction with our purchasing agreement, so they'll come to us when they need those class of vehicles, and we'll include them in our procurement agreement in that period, and then we provide an opportunity for them to service it through our service maintenance. So they are included in our program. They're not included in our fleet vehicle count.
A bit of an anomaly there, and okay, and I guess there must be some benefit to that. I get the bus idea, but obviously that's an entirely different vehicle, right? Specialized for specialized certified drivers. I get that, but just obviously there must be some benefit there that I don't understand. Police, fire, ambulance, we've learned that's not part of the 1350 either.
That's correct.
Anything else within this corporation of 7,000 employees that is not part of the 1350, Mr. Chairman, through you, other than the ones we just mentioned?
Well, we do offer a number of services to public health as well. They'll come to us if they want a vehicle, and we'll purchase that vehicle on their behalf and bill their account for that, and then they'll piggyback on our maintenance side, as well as the dental health bus. That is not part of our fleet as well. That they own that outright, but we built a specification for it. We managed the integration of that bus into our fleet and the disposal of the old one all on their behalf.
Okay. Okay.
Lyle, could you just pick your microphone up a touch? We're having just a little trouble hearing you. Thank you.
Great. Slide 6, Lyle, you've touched on it. The 500,000 so far reduced. That was just because your team, the department suddenly said, hey, we better delve a little more closely into some of our outsourced contracts and how the suppliers or the companies may have been overcharging us or gouging us a bit, and, sharpen pencils here. Explain that a little further, Mr. Chairman, through you, because I'm impressed by that, but obviously it's a bit alarming by that too. So maybe just a further explanation, Lyle?
Absolutely. We moved in 2010, we moved from an internal service model with our waste collection fleet to a fully outsourced model. And through that period of time, we lost sight of where we were taking that fleet and what level of repairs were being done. And in our quarterly or our annual budget reviews is when it came up to us that we had overspent the budget by a certain amount. So we went back and reviewed what happened in that. So it wasn't a matter of gouging, it was a matter of, I think, not understanding that we were getting a gold-plated service. So we weren't getting a core or basic service, the service was being gold-plated. So where we could save on reusing some components, because typically in the industry people are afraid of warranty and chargebacks and things of that nature, that we were getting full replacement of all components. So we started challenging some of those decisions and revisiting some of those decisions and reducing our expectation of gold-plated business to a standard model of service. So that's how we got that money.
Excellent, Lyle. I mean, everybody knows at any level of government, it seems there's those in the private sector, Mr. Chairman, that feel the public sector is an easy target for charging whatever they want. So I'm pleased to hear we've tweaked to that. Next slide, slide 7, Lyle. So the green energy, I just need to understand in a very general way. We know the province has, in my humble opinion, fumbled and bumbled the ball on green energy. They have not done a very good job at all of explaining it. And what the average consumer has seen, Mr. Chairman, is increased cost to this, upfront amount of extra expenditure to somehow down the road save on the environment. So is slide 7 that? Because if it is, I'm a little bit alarmed because I just worry about the third bullet point, large per unit capital investment to acquire some of these units. So Lyle, further explanation, Mr. Chairman, through you on that front, please, because I don't want to pay a lot of money and it's going to hit our the tax levy, which hits our taxpayers some way, somehow, because capital and operating all come from taxpayers eventually, even though they're two different budgets. And if there's not going to be realized savings down the road immediately, forget about this 20, 30 years, Councillor, we'll see some savings. So further explanation, Lyle, please.
Absolutely. So in the early infancy of the program, these vehicles were unknown. Their technology was unknown. They were unproven, and there was insufficient orders placed to realize economies of scale from the OEM. So we paid close to $40,000 in 2006 for our hybrid fleet of Escapes. In 2007, we saw that price drop to the high 30s, in 2008 to the mid-30s, and in 2009 and 2010 was in the low 30s, so $32,000, $33,000. So that was where we paid those premiums to get into that market to do a number of things. First of all, prove that the market is viable, and that it's viable just as a fleet market, but it's viable as a full consumer market. So there's no excuse for those vehicles not being on the road, not being utilized, not reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and not reducing our reliance on fuel oil or use of oil. So as we moved into that market and the manufacturers, we were able to help them realize that they do have a viable market for that. So that was our commitment to buying in at the time to those vehicles. So it's not a matter of paying the wrong price or paying too much, but at this point in time when we see the impacts of the reserve, we want to avoid paying those premium prices if we can still realize those net benefits right now. And that's the model that we're looking at right now. The current
On that.
We're looking at eliminating the additional on that, and indeed, the overall technology improvement in vehicles has us buying those same escape model vehicles in dedicated gasoline now, and they're coming in at 9.2 and 9.3 liters per 100 kilometers an hour, and we're buying them for $23,000, $24,000. So we're moved out of the hybrid market because it's not there, but now we're going to see the net benefit of being in that market and what the technology has ultimately done for that class of vehicle overall.
Okay, very good explanation. A couple of last quick questions, Mr. Chairman. You talk about CNG, looking more for that for waste. Mr. Hull and I have for 20 years talked about on and off with the buses, going CNG, going back to diesel, going back to a hybrid, going to a CNG. Market's gone up, down on all these different options, and we try to get ahead of the curve. So can we just be careful with that? I don't know where CNG stands in terms of fuel costs versus diesel or hybrids right now, but I just worry that today it looks like CNG is a good way to go, and then 2 years from now, 3 years from now, you go, Councillor, forget the CNG market, we better go back to diesel or whatever. Mr. Chairman, through to Lyle, maybe just for an explanation on that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was involved in the CNG bus market back when we implemented here at the City of Hamilton I was working for Unigas at the time. I was in the NGV business. And again, we were trying to find municipalities who are interested in proving that there's a viability and utilization of that fuel and reducing our dependency on foreign oil. We proved that market. We entered that market. Unfortunately, the market, again, economies of scale weren't there where the manufacturers could provide sound, solid, stable engineering before delivering a vehicle to the market. The orders were ramping up faster than they could produce a vehicle, so the technology and the mechanical reliability of the buses was what was the issue is. It's never been the cost of the fuel. It's what's the cost of the fuel versus the maintenance factor. And when we got into that market, there was a period of time where the maintenance and the technology of the actual vehicle was questionable. And that's when we got back out of that market, forced the OEMs, if you want us to buy those buses, you want us to be in that market, you need to improve the reliability of these vehicles. So the manufacturers of those engines and the manufacturers of those buses, they heeded that warning. They've taken a very serious look at it. We do have increased reliability on the mechanical side of the vehicle. So now it's the time to go back and revisit that when our fuel prices are starting to run up above $1.10 or $1.11 a liter to us.
So it sounds like there'll be a lesson learned in terms of if you're going to go in that direction with waste.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure, definitely, yes.
And lastly, the SDR and KPMG, does it bother staff at all that it says on slide 12 that everything we're trying to do, reserve mechanisms, it's not sustainable? So I guess is that part and parcel of your report today, which is somewhat good news, but still challenges ahead? Or is it something where Councillor Collins' motion that, look, everybody needs to be at the table, all players, police, ambulance, fire, HSR, public health, along with Central, they all have to be at the table for greater efficiency. So, A, the SDR, does it bother you a bit that they're saying it's not sustainable, or were you kind of like you expected that? And B, this all players gathering around the table maybe is the ultimate desire. Mr. Chairman, through to Lyle, please.
The fact that it's not sustainable doesn't bother me in the least. I think we need to know what the honesty is. I think we know what the truth is. And once we know what the truth is, then we can put plans and processes in place to manage it and to dig ourselves out of whatever hole we gotten ourselves in by not understanding it in the past. So I was really pleased to see that someone stood up and said, this is not sustainable. What are we going to do about it? As far as the larger global picture, so EMS, fire, police, and transit, they fund from their own capital models. They don't fund out of the reserve. So they're not included in the decision of this because they don't impact the reserve. So the people that are included, which is that Central Fleet Advisory Committee, typically, even though police and fire are invited to the table, from a capital standpoint, that's really the Central Fleet User Group or the core city function user group that's involved in that.
Sounds like they'll have to be politically driven, which I'm all for, at least for the exercise to explore, Mr. Chairman. Lyle, thank you so much, and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Lyle, just for clarity on the what's in and what's out of Central Fleet, where does the EMS sit?
Where do they sit?
Yeah, are they part of your Central Fleet, or are they with Fire, or do they have their own?
They have their own fleet management, but I believe they do it all collectively with Fire. Fire and EMS are under one management of the fleet.
But they're
from my
outside,
knowledge,
they're outside of
but
Central
they are a
Fleet.
separate person. Yes, correct. Thank you.
The next speaker is Councillor Pasuta.
Thank you, Chairman Ferguson, and Lyle, thank you for the presentation, and you're a man with your hands full, no doubt, with all this. So Lyle, slide 11 here, reducing number of locations serviced. You had 9 yards. Can you recall all 9 yards?
Well, so off the top of my head, so we have a mobile service that runs out of Leisure Park. We have a shop in Dundas, Ancaster, Shadoke, Kings Forest, Rymal Road, Forestry, Traffic, Jones Road, Stony Creek, and Central Fleet, Wentworth.
Thank you for that. I guess you passed that test. The tire repair that you have in here, that's for repair and replacement. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, that clarifies that. Asset disposal. How do you figure your timelines you can dispose a piece of equipment, whether it's a truck, a tractor? Is it by the year, the hours accumulated, repair record, or is it just like on a so many year cycle? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
That's a great question. Ideally, in a fleet model, you would have a 100% depreciation recovery, and you would have a planned life cycle analysis, which includes looking at what point does the cost, the rate of depreciation, and the rise in maintenance and the recovery come together. That's really the ideal point in time you want to replace that asset. And if you want to avoid the maintenance cost, you ideally replace it a year or 6 months ahead of that period. In a model that we have where our fleet is probably 55 or 60% funded, we need to have a set life cycle based on what would be the 100% model, and then we need to adjust that every time that life cycle comes up. We need to look at vehicles and say, how many vehicles are at 90% maintenance cost to replacement costs? How many vehicles are at 60%? How many vehicles are underutilized? What's the current rating condition? So we go through that exercise every year to try and determine the group that we need to replace to ensure the sustainability of that fleet reserve.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, through you. So to Lyle then, when the term is up for that piece of equipment, do you typically trade it, or do you not involve the trade and just send off to auction?
Typically, the age of the vehicle by the time we get to that point, we're right now sending it to auction, but we are challenging that model because we're not seeing the rate of returns we're anticipating on that. So we have included in some of our tenders a trade-in option, depending on the piece of equipment. So if we're not likely going to see a good return at the auction for a unique piece of equipment, or we may want to send 10 of them through and devalue the whole market because we have that flood of vehicles through, we will seek a different option. So our waste collection fleet this year, we looked at buyers bidding on buying that whole fleet. So we're just going through that analysis right now. We actually realized a higher rate of return than we would have if we'd have went to auction for that. So those are some of the things that we're currently addressing in the disposal market. But up until now, it's strictly just been an auction-based business.
One more question, Mr. Chairman. Lyle, all of our equipment is purchased. You don't lease any vehicles?
That's correct. It's currently all purchased right now. But we are, the lease model is something we're looking at. And I can speak to Gulf Operations. They've looked at the net savings we've given them. They've come back and believe that we can lower that cost again if we look at a different model of funding the equipment, maintaining the equipment, and replacing it on a shorter life cycle. So we're going to step into that this year with looking at a lease maintenance option for those Gulf equipment vehicles and see if we can assist them some other way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Lyle.
Great questions. Thank you. Last speaker is Councillor DeBall.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I'll thank you. Just to a couple of questions where Councillor Jackson had referred to on slide 6. They're reducing the outsourced expenditures by $500,000 through enhanced monitoring of repairs. Is that an annual savings, or I mean, what is that time frame that we found we're saving $500,000?
So we saved that in 2012. So in 2011, we had about $3.2 million in outside services. In the end of 2012, we reduced that to about 2.6. We're still on target to reduce it again this year, but it's not 500,000 year over year. It was 500,000 in that one calendar year, and we're looking to reduce that again this year. So far, we're on target. We're underspent currently to budget as of this point. We still don't have all of our year-end invoicing in yet, so we're not sure where we're going to fall out. We're anticipating it'll be even less again this year.
Lyle, if I took one of your answers correctly from Councillor Jackson, we outsource because there's some kind of policy what we're doing in-house in 2010. Is that correct?
We had in-house maintenance when the waste collection fleet lived at 330 Wentworth Street. It made sense. We were there. They were there. The fleet came here every night. We did that maintenance there. They went to 1579 Burlington Street, and the transit time to get the vehicle back and forth, and their request to have the vehicles done after hours, where we didn't have a full afternoon shift at that time, we engaged a contract service for them so that they could get that maintenance done during their downtime so it didn't impact their operational time. And in reviewing that process, it made sense. It makes sense to do that.
So from 2010, whatever the cost was to outsourcing it, and we caught it in 2012 to 2013.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
$500,000. Obviously, there's a savings here, but there has to be an increase of what we found for $500,000 of savings. So I'm trying to weigh it up. When did we catch this? Did we go a couple of years outsourcing, and then we were doing a comparable of, geez, we could do this cheaper here or here?
Prior to 2010, we had a different chargeback model for the maintenance of the fleet. We included an hourly rate and everything was supposed to be all in. And in 2010, we changed that model to a direct chargeback to the service user. At that point in time, they also wanted to go to an outsource because they felt that they would be able to realize a lower hourly rate through an outsourced model. So based on that knowledge, we went out in 2011 to an outsourced model. And I think through 2011, to be honest with you, we didn't realize we were getting a gold-plated service until the tail end of 2011. When we reviewed that budget in 2012, we realized that we had to take tighter control over the approval of the repairs, what we were going to accept as a reasonable repair, and we're going to challenge and question on reusable parts and components. So we sat down with the vendor who had that contract at the time, and we were able to get them on board so that they gave us a better itemized list of estimates and costs when we were making those decisions. My garage superintendent spent more time at that facility overseeing those repairs and maintenance in 2012.
So I take it then, and just by that answer, then we didn't do a comparison at all. We caught it at the end.
That's correct, yes.
Realized that this is costly to outsource it. More would have been done in-house, correct?
I don't think we had a full handle on what the total cost of just that fleet was in-house because we were grouping it into, like, again, an hourly chargeback rate. Fleet was overspent in their budget at the end of every calendar year, but I don't think we understood completely what portion of the fleet was driving that over expenditure and how we were getting there. I think now by going to that outsource model with waste, we had a better understanding of what level of repair is required, what level of wear and tear is on that fleet, so we were able to jump into it. But in the first year of that calendar year 2011, I don't think we had a true handle on that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Okay, that's all my speakers. So I'll thank you very, very much for coming out today. I thought you did a great presentation, and it's not easy to stand there and get peppered with questions for an hour. But
I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I would be welcome back anytime for sure.
Well, you did an outstanding job answering the questions, I believe. So I kind of motion to receive the presentation. Moved by Whitehead, seconded by Pasuta. All in favor? Carried. And Councillor Collins, you have a motion. Thanks,
Thank you very much.
It's moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Jackson, that staff undertake an internal review of all City of Hamilton fleet functions to investigate potential savings through a comprehensive reorganization, bulk purchasing, facilities management, or other opportunities. And two, that the Hamilton Police Services Board be invited to participate in these discussions. And when I reference the word all there, it includes HSR, Central Fleet, Fire, Ambulance, Public Health, and any other fleet functions that may exist within the corporation.
Jerry?
So if I may, we'll take the direction. Can I just have Don Hall go over the buses? We did have it as Central Fleet before and the challenges, but maybe Don can explain it. We definitely will follow the direction of council, but just give you a bit of information. Thank you.
Yeah, Don can do that, although I think it'll be in the report when it comes back also. But Don?
Just quickly, as part of the service delivery review in 2000, fleet was removed from transit, and after I think about 2 to 3 years, it was returned to transit because there was a better economy. At a very strategic level, it was viewed as a core service in that in order to hold the transit director accountable to his position, there were two essential components. One was the bus driver and the other was the bus. So a decision was made at that time to return it. I might suggest as part of the motion and part of what you're giving us direction to do is that we look into organizational structures across the country and perhaps talk to our counterparts throughout the country about their structures and get their views on whether or not these structures are working for them.
Okay, I think we can accept that as direction. The mover just says as part of the reorg, that's in his motion, so I think you can feel pretty clear you can go off and do that. Councillor Whitehead.
It's a sidebar, but I mean, there was a question asked, and I think there was a number of yards and sites that were identified. So between those yards and sites and Public Works yards and sites, Mr. Chair, I don't know if we've ever received an updated report on those assets, and what is the disposition of those sites? What is the projected need of those sites, and what ones are we looking at maybe determining as surplus? I know that we had a report, Mr. Chair, that I think 60% of one site was being rented out for $1 for storage, and I don't have so my issue is if we're can get a better return on the taxpayer's dollar for these yards, I'd like to know which ones are viable for that consideration.
Yeah, I think this is off topic from the motion that's before us now. This is about consolidating the fleet. You're talking about yards, which is a resolution we're going to be dealing with later to look at and report back to us in 2015 on these yards.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, I see no more questions then. The motions, anybody need it reread or everybody understand it? Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Item 8.1, Councillor Jackson, you want to refer this back?
Mr. Chairman, could I please, I would ask if I could get a seconder to refer it back. I know it's only an information report. I've talked to Rob Norman, one of the authors of it, with staff, and it's just some areas of it a little concerning on page 3. It seems like maybe leaning towards a monopoly like Toronto has, yet other municipalities I'm aware of have a nice hybrid of various service providers. It talks about a consultant possibly of $75,000. So although it's just an information report, and Councillor Powers has been consulted on this, fortunately couldn't be here today, I just asked for no more than a 2 to 4 week opportunity to meet with staff and just to refer this back.
Motion referred back, second by Councillor Collins. All in favor?
Carried. Thank you,
Item
Mr. Chairman.
8.2, Public Yards Review Strategy. Any discussion? Councillor Pasuda?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I read through this here, and we get to, on the report, page 6 of 11, and help me through this. We have a listing here of 9 yards. Are these yards, through you, Mr. Chairman, to staff, are they all functioning now?
Who wants to take this?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, can you just repeat the question? I was just getting myself settled.
Okay. So through you, Mr. Chairman, page 6 of 11, the Public Works Yards Master Plan Review. And on page 6, there's 9 yards listed here, or 9 items. Some of these yards that are on here, are we saying they're still being used or not being used?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. This is not the full listing of yards. This is just the recommendation. Actually, there's more than 9. If you flip the page, that table continues on through page 7. There's actually 14 recommendations listed here. They don't necessarily reflect every single yard that is out there. They're just the recommendations that were brought forward as part of the 2009 study.
Mr. Chairman, I'm asking my question around about way down here because we've got relocate the roads operation from Millgrove Yard to Flamborough Yard. Well, that building on Millgrove Road is actually conservation or revamping that now, right?
That's correct.
Is there storage facilities at Center Road by Carlisle? Is there stuff being stored in that building there now?
Yeah, that is still there, the Center Road facility. So just to clarify, these the items you're referring to in this table, these are just the recommendations that were part of the 2009 study. These aren't recommendations that we're bringing forward that should be implemented right now. What we're stating is that these, due to various conditions, service delivery, reorganization, transportation plan, and all the great work Don's done with LRT. These recommendations need to be revisited to determine if they're still feasible.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, the recommendation here that the financing of public yards review be funded through existing accounts up to $95,000. We're hiring a consultant for this?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Chairman, do we not have anybody with our own staff qualified to do this type of a thing?
Jerry, do you want to take that?
Through the chair, staff will assist, but we need the consultant. We utilize them for their expertise. And the other, and it is staff doing it, we don't have dedicated resources, but we can project manage a consultant. And again, we get the expertise from off our roster system for, getting it done timely and efficiently.
Mr. Chairman, I just thought maybe we had somebody who's qualified to do this. Really, I'm not in the mood to support recommendation B.
Thank you. Councilor White, could you take a chair for a second? Are you Andrew Grice? Okay, you're the author of the report. Question on the Ancaster Shaver Road Park. You want to look at taking it down and moving it into the industrial park, which of course means demolishing all the buildings and salt domes and offices and so on at Shaver and relocating that a kilometer away at the Ancaster Industrial Park. Is the reason for that suggestion is because the land where it's currently sitting is too valuable?
For you, Mr. Chair, again, this is just, these are the recommendations from the 2009 report. We're not recommending that any of these recommendations go forward at this time. What we're suggesting is that we review these recommendations, possibly update them to reflect future needs. We've seen substantial residential growth on the city of Hamilton in various areas. We want to make sure before coming forward with any recommendations such as these that we reevaluate them to make sure that they're going to serve our current needs as well as our future needs.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. But Andrew, what's the logic of having this one identified? It just puzzles me. You want to demolish all these things. They're nice buildings. And public routes and all the salt domes are all brand new. Move it all to the Ancaster Industrial Park. What's the logic of even investigating that?
To be honest, I can't speak to the rationale behind the 2009 recommendation that came forward. Perhaps someone.
Jerry?
So what we're doing is, the rationale for doing the yards review, it has been done before. So this is what we did. One of the key initiatives from this was relocating the waste fleet to 1579 Burlington Street, relocating darts down to 330 Wentworth. And these were the other recommendations at the time. So we're just telling you this is what was in the last review. The rationale, we can get a copy to all of members of the committee of the yards rationalization study that was done in 2009, provide that to committee members, and that'll give you the reason for all of these 14 recommendations. What we're saying moving forward is let's look at our yards, and I think the fleet discussion is a good analysis. Look at the fleet, look at your yards as well. So that's why we want to redo it. So this is just what was recommended. If you need to know the rationale why it was recommended, I can get the report forwarded to all members of committee. We don't have that with us right now. At the time, it probably was something that could be considered. We're not saying any of this is going to be done until it's reviewed.
Okay, just through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Pizzuto's point, we're spending $95,000 on a study. And I can tell you right now, number 3 don't make any sense at all. You might get $400,000 for the land it's sitting on. You have to pay $200,000 where you're going, but you got to put up all the new facilities. So the numbers won't work. And so I'm puzzled why we're spending $95,000, although I can't speak intelligently about the other 13 because I'm not familiar with them. So I'll take the chair back to Councillor Whitehead during the next speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, and I said this when I first got elected, that we need to take a look at all our assets and do assessment and determine what assets we are surplus to our needs, and then see if there's a rationale to sell those assets, or maybe other departments may have needs for them. If not, then sell those assets and get a better return for the tax dollar. So certainly the concept is good and it's sound. I agree that you got an old report Now you're looking, coming back and reviewing that old report and the current climate and to determine if the recommendations originally came forward. So this might address your issue, Councillor Ferguson, whether they're even relevant at this point in time, because that's why you're reviewing the whole issue. I guess the key component, we've done this on procurement, we've done this in other areas, we did it with wastewater, is when you hire a consultant, my concern is there always maybe a perceived bias coming in because they're very tight with the departments. And I'd rather look at working with a consultant before we get to that point, maybe through a subcommittee, to make sure we develop a terms of reference that would drive a matrix, which would again address the issues that Councillor Ferguson might have identified. Identify the matrix in which the lens that the consultant would look through, because currently, in absence of that, they're working directly with staff, and certainly the board of directors or the council is completely not providing an input in regards to values and mission statements and so forth. So I would ask through the chair, through appropriate staff, would that be an appropriate way to go in regards to this consultant, is to sit down and develop that matrix in terms of reference?
Through the chair, I guess on page 9 of 11, we have the focus areas, condition assessments, and one of the biggest things why it's back is the major capital that's required for the infrastructure deficit of our buildings. We have residential growth around the facilities. We have to look at that. What is the adjacent land use? We want to ensure that having a yard in a residential area can be problematic at times. Fuel location and alternatives critical because of the cost of fuel and the fleet issues we've discussed. The partnerships. We do share our yards, not just with the Public Works divisions, but we share them with Go Transit, with DARTS, and other agencies, and then the surplus land to be disposed of. So if there's issues we're missing as part of the analysis, it's definitely something we could add to the terms of reference for when we do hire the consultant.
Okay, and I believe my question was, would not be prudent, and I appreciate what's here. It's what's not here that I don't appreciate, and I think when you have a subcommittee, that robust discussion could only enhance that matrix in which decisions are being made. In absence of that subcommittee, then we are basically ad hocing things in regards to what's already here, then just calling staff, what about this, what about that, and we're doing it through a larger structure, which is not always effective or efficient. So again, my question to staff, would it not be prudent to have maybe one or two or three representatives from Public Works to sit down in a subcommittee to look at this matrix and see if it needs to be expanded on or amended, whatever? Would they support that?
So, through the chair, we'll take the direction of the committee. I don't feel we have a bias as a department for the yards rationalization. I think we have the expertise as well as utilizing consultant to provide a solid product for the solution of the yards rationalization. If you want a subcommittee, we'll go by direction. Do I think it's necessary? I don't think it's necessary right now. No different than the fleet. We're using the key staff, but we will take the direction from the committee.
Okay, and Mr. Chair, I think, and you had mentioned some legitimate concerns that I don't see really reflected here, but I guess my concern is when you look through a Public Works lens, you're looking at, it's almost like from a silo perspective, and there's things that many councillors are aware of in regards to our overall and issues within the community that we can bring to the table in regards to reflecting on that matrix. So I guess my concern is whether it's here and whether it's even in the auspices or the scope of Public Works I would suggest that that may not be the case, and it's not a criticism. It's just the nature of the business. I mean, you know your business best in regards to what you do, but you may not appreciate some other areas or other information that may be pertinent in regards to the outcomes here. And that's my concern, is that if we have a subcommittee that may provide a further assessment of this matrix and may add or amend with that broader knowledge and information, it's another set of eyes that can only enhance the outcome.
Okay, I was suggesting, Councillor, that's where you want to go. You should put a motion up. I can tell you that Public Works is a pretty small committee. I think we can deal with this as a standing committee. But if you want to move towards a subcommittee to move the meeting along, I suggest you make a motion and let the committee decide.
Okay, well, I think that's something I'll move at council and have discussions with my colleagues before that.
Okay. Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And this is here because during the last budget process, it was part, I think, of Jerry's presentation. And I had flagged it because I had trouble understanding why we'd be going through another yards master plan review, knowing that, as was referenced and is in the report, we just went through one last term of council. And my concern was, at the time when Jerry was presenting, was that we had implemented a number of the recommendations. A couple of them are listed here. And from that list of recommendations that came through the first study in 2009, we spent several $1 million in terms of making some operational changes. We spent a lot of capital money doing that. And the concern I had flowing from that report is something that you and others oftentimes raise, and we just talked about it as part of the fleet presentation. And that is, we're looking for those savings, and for whatever reason, although we may deem our organization more efficient as a result of some of these changes, we fail to see in many instances the dollar savings and the operating savings that come with these improvements. So the concern when I noticed that we had another recommendation in for a second yard review was that flowing from this study will come capital improvements that will be suggested. Council will commit to some of those, I'm certain, and we'll end up spending millions of dollars, only to find that in the grand scheme of things, when you look at the levy, we see little or no change in that regard. So that was my concern, and that's why staff, I think Jerry was directed to take it out of the budget for 2013, come back with a report, and that's why this report is here today. Can I just, and it's not referenced, I don't believe, in the report, but what did we spend on the first plan for the yards review? And that was through a consultant, I believe, as well.
Yeah. Excuse me, through you, Mr. Chair, it was with Dillon Consulting, was retained, and it was approximately $135,000.
Sorry,
$135,000 assignment.
And in terms of the amount of money that we spent, there are two recommendations here that we've funded already. That's the Mountain Transit Center changes and the 330 Wentworth Street. Do we know how much the first plan cost us in terms of capital improvements?
So, through the chair, the waste collections was a $1 million, that relocation, and the darts was $650,000, the relocation and renovations required.
1.6 total.
And I thought we had implemented other recommendations from the plan. Those two are the most prominent, I think, as part of the implementation of the first plan, but I thought that there were others that we had funded that were smaller in a dollar amount, but nothing coming to mind.
Through you, Mr. Chair, not to my knowledge, no, none of the other recommendations were implemented. Some of them were partially implemented only because, not due to the yard study, but things changed. So if you look at, example, we talked about Mill Grove Yard being closed. It wasn't closed, in relation to the yard review, but it has been closed.
Okay. So the concern that I had, I still have the same concerns I had in January of 2013 when this was first presented, and that's, again, as Councillor Pursuta referenced, we're relying on a consultant again to come in and build upon, I guess, the recommendations that have yet to be implemented as part of the first plan. And it seems like this is a trend where almost every term of council now we're going to investigate our yards and whether there are operational efficiencies to be had absent of levy improvements. So I still have those concerns today. There are so many other issues that have been sitting in line in the capital budget queue waiting to be funded, and to know that, again, in the grand scheme of our budget, it's not a lot of money that's on the table in front of us here today, but what comes from it are recommendations that will, again, inflate the capital budget process with other initiatives related to yards that will compete against some of the most basic services and infrastructure requirements that we're pushing, whether it's on a ward-by-ward basis or some of the corporate goals that we're trying to achieve as part of our strat plan. So those are my concerns. I still have them today, and I think at this point in time I'd be inclined to vote against the recommendation that's in front of us.
Thank you. And the last speaker is Councillor McCaddy.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just given some of the comments from my colleagues, I wonder if I could ask staff, are there a subset of all the yard master plan recommendations from the first time around in Table 1 on page 6 and 7? Are there perhaps even 2 or 3 of those that are ones that we have a pretty good handle on, Mr. Chair, and we can look at those in-house and come forth with recommendations? And following Councillor Collins' comments, perhaps there's ones that are there are cost savings involved rather than a significant capital outlay, or perhaps cost savings outstripping the capital outlay, so there's a net positive. Is that perhaps a way to proceed on these, pick your top 3, that kind of approach, Mr. Chair, through you to staff?
Jerry, want to take it? Or Brian?
Through the chair, I don't have the answer right now. I'd have to go back and talk to staff on it. I don't know if they have an answer.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we did sit down with all the divisional directors and we did review the Table 1 that you see in front of you. Try and come up with ideas as to what we could implement and what does not seem feasible based on our current conditions. And there's actually not a whole lot we see in here that in its current form we would probably come forward with as a recommendation. There may be some opportunities to relocate or merge, but maybe from point A, maybe not to point B. The point B may change to a different location just due to capital investment that's occurred over the last couple of years. It does not necessarily make sense to shut down a facility that was just spent heavy investment.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we'll put the Councillor Whitted.
Dancing around it, and Councillor Collins mentioned it.
Just a second, Councillor. I think Councillor Pasuta was ahead of you. I'll come to you after Councillor Pasuta. He was up as the second-time speaker.
Chairman Ferguson, I'm going to go back and ask this question maybe in a different way. To page 6, Table 1, the recommendations, there's 14 in there. Through you, Mr. Chairman, how many of those 14 recommendations have been addressed to this date?
Currently, none of the recommendations listed in Table 1 have been implemented. There were 2 major recommendations as part of the 2009 report that were implemented. The ones Jerry just spoke to, that was relocation of darts down to 330 Wentworth, as well as the relocation of waste to 1579 Burlington Street. The 2009 report indicated that business cases for the following 14 recommendations would be brought forward if deemed feasible or
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to belabor this, but item number 8 on Table 1, relocate the roads operation from Millgrove Yard to Flamborough Yard on Brock Road, that is done. Look down, relocate the facility storage from Millgrove Yard. Millgrove Yard, there is no more storage facility. Facilities there, the Hamilton Conservation Authority have that building. And through you, Mr. Chairman, and I don't know about this one, but I remember Councillor Johnson was saying that the Binbrook Yard was going to be moved to Tapley Town. And I don't know if that's in the process or not. Do we know that? Through you, Mr. Chairman?
Brian, do you want to take that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, it's presently not being contemplated just by virtue of limited capacity at the Tapley Town Yard. It's been committed to IMOS for the remainder of their contract, which runs out through the year 2017. So we're bound for their use, and we're also limited in terms of size. So I think one of the intents of this review was to look at some of the growth areas and what the longer-term demands for efficient yard operations would be into the future, the potential for consolidate, and that Benbrook example is a great example of being able to potentially consolidate Tapley Town and Benbrook into a third location, and with reinvestment into a site that would be more central to the growth areas that we now understand, and also to the point of making our operations more efficient. And we talked earlier about limiting our kilometrage from the point of view of being more central.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just on that, Andrew, number 4 is done too, isn't it? I know we approved the forestry division in their new building.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. The forestry department has spent significant capital up at the Upper Ottawa Yard to consolidate their operations, but they are not fully consolidated at that facility.
Okay, Councillor White, then we'll move to a decision.
Yeah, I just, in this question to Jerry, so I'm going through the current or the past criteria that was utilized. Councillor Collins makes an excellent point. I don't see anything here that uses the lens of a positive reliance on the levy. It's not weighted in any way in this matrix in regards to, at the end of the day, to see if we can actually not only create efficiencies that may not be resulting in a levy, a positive levy impact, but there's no mention of reducing costs that reduce our reliance on the levy. I'm just wondering, can we put that as a part of the matrix?
Through the chair, one of the key things we just talked about, one of the biggest factors is in the fleet is fuel costs and the maintenance. And the Public Yards Review will evaluate alternative fuel measures for fleet vehicles and the relocation of fueling stations to reduce the dead end time, leading to more cost-effective service. So that's one of the key initiatives we're looking at, which should impact the levy.
Okay, and Mr. What I'm looking at, and tell me if maybe I'm on the wrong track, but I'm looking at if we got a yard that's 60% not being utilized by city, period. I don't, Conservation Authority, I mean, they should be doing chargebacks anyway, so we should receive some revenue. By the end of the day, if we and there are areas that could be sold and developed and have annualized taxes, then it does impact on the levy and is a positive influence. So I don't see that kind of element in this matrix.
Okay, I think it's part of the process you'll go through is to bring that back to us. Should this motion carry today, Councillor?
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Okay, there is a recommendation before us. What's your wish? You're moving it? Councillor White, is there a seconder? Not seeing none. Is there a motion then that we simply receive it? Moved by Collins, seconded by McCaddy. Discussion on receiving it. All in favor?
So I'm trying to understand, and I'll have no problem going out and communicating that we have all these yards. We've got yards that are 60% not being utilized by our city, and yet, for whatever reason, we've now decided, this board, that we're not going to do any further review on the yards. And I'm prepared to yell that from the treetops. So I'm real concerned that all we're doing now is receiving. So with lack of direction, I don't have a problem with receiving, but there's no direction. So at this point in time, I'm trying to understand where we go from here.
By receiving the report, I see that as turning the recommendation down.
Okay, so my problem with receiving, because that's where we're at now,
yep,
is that we're not providing any further direction. So we continue bleeding money.
That's correct, though.
Taxpayers' money in regards to these yards. I don't think that's a service to the taxpayer. I'm debating the receipt.
Then vote accordingly on the.
That's what I'm doing. I'm debating the receipt because without direction, basically we're saying it's okay to waste taxpayers' money on without doing the full rationalization of our yards.
Okay, but you also heard we just went through this whole review 3 years ago, so we're not wasting taxpayers' money. You shouldn't paint that picture.
Well, you tell me, Mr. Chair, because you're getting in the debate now and you shouldn't, but you tell me how it doesn't make sense to review our yards with the intent to get rid of surplus yards to our needs, so that the taxpayer's off the hook for those yards that are not being utilized at the optimum rate. So concerning to me, Mr. Chair, is that we are not providing any direction now. We're going to live with the status quo, which is not good enough for the taxpayer.
Councillor Collins, then we'll call the vote.
Yep, thanks. I thought we'd already voted on it, but just to allay any concerns the councillor would have, as you just mentioned, we've been through a comprehensive review of our yards process. There are recommendations that have flown through the report. There's a number of them that staff have just mentioned that we've yet to even address as part of the first phase of the review. And I would suggest that nothing prevents our staff from coming forward on a site-by-site basis in consultation with the ward councillor, to come up with an action plan, again, based on the first yards rationalization review, with recommendations that would flow through either committee and council if need be, if there's a cost attached to it, and we can debate those and the merit attached to them when they come back to us.
Councillor McCaddy, or can we put it to the vote? Okay, so all in favor of receiving? Opposed? One opposed. The motion carries. Okay, I want to move on then to 8.3. This is the new transit pass for Brock University. Is there any discussion on it? If not, can I have a motion on it? There's no cost. Councillor McCaddy.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. This is good stuff for sure. But on page 2 it says there is no current means of determining the net impact in HSR revenues. There's likely a positive impact. I'm just trying to understand that comment. There's 600 members attending courses. We certainly don't know how many of those folks are going to avail themselves. But if it's a mandatory universal transit pass, do we know what the value of that would be in terms of revenues? Is there even a range, perhaps a range of revenues based on our understanding of the business of the business of transit, Mr. Deputy Mayor, Mr. Chair?
Who are you directing that question to, Mr. Hall?
Nancy Purser's.
Nancy? Okay.
Or Nancy or Don, whoever wants to answer.
Nancy, sounds like you're on the...
Through you, Mr. Chair, we do know what the overall revenue for the program will be, and it's about $76,000 that we'll receive. What we don't know is how many of those 600 students currently utilize the transit service and pay the regular adult fare. Based on my conversations, I'm going to say it's not very many that use it, because right now at the school they have major parking issues, so a lot of them drive. So it's that offsetting. I don't know how many adult passes sales we're going to lose out on.
Okay. Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I understand the comment now.
Are you moving the recommendation, Councillor McCaddy? Seconded by Councillor Jackson. No further discussion. All in favor? Carried. This is the standardization of water, wastewater plant operations. Is there any discussion on 8.4? Moving to Councillor Pasuta. Seconder. Councillor Jackson. All in favor? Carried. Item 8.5, Transportation Division Complement Adjustment. Any discussion on it? Councillor Deval.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just through you to staff, did two positions, or of the electrician, the component mechanic, and the electronic technician, we want to eliminate those jobs, so we add two staff positions in management. Who would be doing this type of work in the future?
We are generalizing all of these activities under the overall mechanics. So what we're doing is harmonizing the mechanics position and eliminating these specialized positions. These positions are actually surplus as a result of council's investment in the fleet over the last decade or so. So we're hoping to take advantage of that surplus to rebalance our staff allocation to an area I think that's in very significant need. A couple comments, if you don't mind me elaborating, Mr. Chairman, is what we're attempting to address here is that we have an exceptionally high staff to management ratio here of 66-1. That's extreme for both the city and for the industry at large. Just to put things in perspective, we have one non-union supervisory car on the road for the entire city, with 170 buses out at peak period, to monitor the entire city. So one non-union car for the entire city. So we see that as being problematic. I guess a recurring question that's come up today that I wish I'd put in the report now is that as a result of council's investment in the fleet over the last decade or so, we've actually reduced our parts budget by $1.2 million. Our finance staff have verified that for us. And that's been passed on directly to the levy to offset levy pressures. So what we're asking for today is committee's consideration of reinvesting a very, very small amount, in our view, of that $1.2 million back into an area of the operation that is definitely in need of some support. We've got some pretty significant gaps in our operations section. Perhaps most importantly is we don't currently adhere to the corporate requirement to do performance appraisals. We simply haven't got the staff to do that. We'll require one staff on a year-round basis to undertake performance appraisals for the bus operators. The other is that we believe we have insufficient support out there for the operators in terms of accident investigation, detours, and assaults. We'd like to improve our communications. In discussion with our union, that's an area that we agree on, that our communications need to improve. So I guess in short, we're asking for committee's support to reinvest a small amount of the $1.2 million back into an area of the operations that's experiencing very significant gaps, evidenced by the 66-to-1 staff to management ratio. We feel it leaves us the city, in a very vulnerable position right now, and we'd like to use this opportunity without increasing the complement to reallocate staff, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Don, for that. And so I just want to know, these positions that we're replacing, they've been vacant. How long they've been vacant for?
Some of them have been vacant, I would guess, in excess of a year. We undertook, as the report suggests, 3 separate consulting studies, and that took some time. And then it's taken some time for us to get them back in front of you. So some of those positions have been vacant, I would think, in excess of a year, Mr. Chairman.
So, okay, and through you, Mr. Chair, then Don, none of these positions that are open until we made that decision that you no longer needed them, would they be any of that work being filled with outsourcing or overtime?
I would say no, Mr. Chairman, not at all.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Collins, can you take a chair for a second? And Don, you say you have one non-union supervisor out there now. How many unionized supervisors do we have out there?
We have 17 unionized supervisors, understanding that to equip one shift on a 21/7, we need 5 supervisors. So at peak period, we have 3 unionized supervisory cars on the road and 1 non-unionized supervisory cars on the road, and that drops by 1 car in the off-peak and the off-peak and the evening, Mr. Chairman.
And if you're bringing these additional 2 supervisors, why wouldn't the union insist they go into their membership?
We've been through that, and principally it's because these positions have the added responsibility for hiring, firing, promotion, and demotion. Most importantly, those our positions are required to undertake the performance appraisals that aren't being done right now, and so at the moment we're in non-compliance with corporate policy with respect to conducting performance appraisals on an annual basis with our bus operators.
So unionized supervisors anywhere in the city don't do performance reviews?
I'm not aware of the practice in the rest of the city, Mr. Chairman, but it's an issue as well as performance management. Of the 7 superintendents we have right now, 4 are currently covering 1 shift on the street. We have 1 dispatcher that fills the vacant shifts on a daily basis, and 1 safety training and regulatory compliance superintendent that in fact looks after safety training and regulatory compliance for an entire complement of 650 staff. So he does the entire division. That leaves us with 1 inside non-union superintendent with overall responsibility for 450 bus operators, Mr. Chairman, and we're learning from experience as of late that is just far too lean a structure for us to sustain and ensure that we're managing in the best interests of the city.
Okay, and just to the committee members, and I don't think this will come to a surprise to Don, because I talked about agenda review. We were convinced to spend a whole pile of capital dollars to reduce the age of our fleet. And the reason we were going to do that, principal reason, was for cost savings. And we've seen that in the parts, but the single biggest cost of running the city of Hamilton is our salary and wages, and we're not going to enjoy those savings of the mechanics because we're going to put on more supervisors. I don't like the optics of that. I think we should have been told that when we agreed to invest heavily in the fleet, that it won't result in reduction in the labor side of it. I can't argue with Don on his topics about ratios to employees, to supervisors and all this stuff, but it seems to have worked for the last number of years, the ratio of supervisors to employees we have. But darn it, when we're told we can expect savings by making significant capital investment, and it goes back to the discussion we had at the yard rationalization, and it doesn't impact the levy because, well, now we want to put on more supervisors, I have trouble with that. So I'm unable to support this recommendation. And I'll take the chair back.
Chair's back to you.
Thank you. And I see no other speakers. So Councillor McCaddy.
Mr. Chair, I'd move the staff recommendation.
Is there a seconder to that? Councillor Jackson seconded. Further discussion on the motion? All in favor? Opposed? I counted 2 for and 3 opposed. So I think I'm going to call. I think we should have a stand recorded vote in this because I couldn't see how a number of people voted on. So all in favor of the motion?
We have McCaddy, Jackson, Duval, and Whitehead.
And those opposed?
Pasuda, Collins, and Councillor Ferguson.
So that carries, Mr. Clerk. Okay, let's go on then to item. My roadmap. Item 8.6. This is the Greenbelt cycling route. Is there any discussion on that, Councillor McCaddy?
Just, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to move this, and just with thanks to Darrell Bender and the cycling subcommittee, which I sit on behalf of council, worked out some of the details working with the Greenbelt Foundation themselves, and this is to make a loop around the whole Greenbelt area, not only with a trail that we're used to down by the waterfront, but a cycling route that moves up through the watersheds. And this is the Hamilton version of the Greenbelt route. And I know Darrell and the committee's done quite a bit of work on it, so thanks to Darrell for this.
Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And similarly, I'm strongly supportive of this. I want to thank Darrell for the proactive way that he consulted with my office up in my area with the existing Stone Church Road infrastructure, and to build on that with the East Mountain Trail Loop, the Albion Falls area. This is exactly, Mr. Chairman, I know I've been criticized in the past from a commuter cycling lane standpoint, some of the concerns I have with cost and overall usage and benefit, but I have in my record on council strongly been supportive of the city's recreational trails master plan, and I see this with the Greenbelt Foundation, thanks to Councillor McCaddy's involvement of enhancing and building upon that and making our recreational trails route second to none at such a minimal cost, and actually with some support and donation from the Greenbelt Foundation. So to Darrell and his staff, I thank them, and I'll second the motion. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Councillor Pasuda.
Thank you, Chairman Ferguson, and I too am supportive of this. I just got a question here. On the executive summary, it says a minimal construction works are required, and then over on the next page in financial it talks about 20,000. Are they part and one of the same, the 20,000? Here, Mr. Chairman, I believe Darrell's going to take that one.
Darrell?
So just for clarity again, you were asking about, through you, Mr. Chair, the question was about what's included in the 20,000 or the reference to the
Well, I'll put it back out there again, Mr. Chairman. So, Darrell, I've got on the executive summary, it says minimal construction works are required. And then when you get over to the financials, that's the $20,000 we're talking about?
Correct.
Okay. That's fine then, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
And I'll just add one other piece of detail on that in the sense that there are some larger projects associated with new development that will ultimately be a part of the network. And so those will, when those are completed, that'll be part of the ultimate network, but until those are completed through other projects. Thanks.
Okay, Councilor White, you take the chair for 1 sec. Just a couple of questions. Daryl, on the route, it comes down Carluke, north on Shaver. The letters are so small, I can't read the street names. What does it go east on to turn right off of Shaver? Is that Wilson or is that Jerseyville?
Through you, Chair, that's Jerseyville.
Then it goes down Martin Road, the on-open road allowance?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, that's all my questions. Can I have a motion then on the report? Please, by Councillor McCaddy, second by Councillor Jackson. All in favor, carried. The Red Hill Valley Parkway improvements, is there any discussion on this? Councillor Collins?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, this is a motion that I had put, I believe it was last year. I just first want to thank staff for the recommendations, and Steve and Dave, who were the authors of the report, were kind enough to sit down with me and go over the recommendations. It was a very thorough investigation of this portion of the parkway, and there are some great recommendations that flow through the report here in terms of improved signage and lane markings and the use of those cat's eyes. I do have a couple of questions, though. In terms of the lighting, the request for lighting had come from different people in the community over a period of, I'd say about a year and a half. And the complaint that drove the report here was the suggestions from community that, especially during inclement weather conditions, where the parkway starts to meet Red Hill and there's that bend as it crosses the escarpment and starts to come down the slope, especially when it's there's snow on the ground, slush, during the evening hours. It's very difficult, especially for seniors, to delineate where the lanes are there. And so that the request through committee in a motion that I put was for staff to come back and look for ways and means in which to address that situation. And so we have some recommendations here. And part of it, though, says that we didn't implement lighting at this location through the parkway design process to ensure that we didn't have light pollution to the adjacent residential homes that are in that area. And I'm assuming as well for the, it's in the middle of that natural environment there. So I'm comfortable in terms of moving ahead what's here today, but I don't want to abandon the concept of a light or two in strategic locations if it's required in the future. So I want to be clear. The question I would have in endorsing today's report, although it comes off the outstanding business list, we're not abandoning forever the concept of maybe adding a light or two in the future. Is that a safe assumption to make? Certainly would need to come through this committee and council on.
Mr. Chair. I think that's correct, Councillor. I think at this point what we're recommending is that we would try some of the things that we've listed in terms of the information report and see how the public responses to that. And I think after about a year of monitoring that, if that still proves to be an issue, that's certainly something that we could discuss further.
That's great. So we could bring it back then at a later date. Will you formally be presenting either to the area councillors? I know there are 3 or 4 of us that share this area. Or are you coming formally back through the committee with an information report, Jeff, through you, Mr. Chairman?
Through you, Mr. Chair, really whatever your preference is.
Okay. All right. Again, I thank staff for coming up with this comprehensive list. And I know we always receive helpful suggestions from the community, and this is one of those that has certainly borne some fruitful information and some positive changes that will come as a result of it. I wonder through you, Mr. Chairman, whether there's an opportunity for us to undertake some kind of a safety audit of the remaining portion of the parkway and or the link. Is that something that we could consider in future work plans as that might flow through the department without a motion through committee? I only say that because in the absence of asking for what was here, we probably wouldn't have identified some of the changes that you'll be implementing over the next 6 months to a year.
Mr. Chair, I think that's something that we can go through and review as staff. The report was really good in kind of outlining some of the areas that we can look for improvements. We're going to be doing a few things along the Red Hill Valley anyways in terms of EDR routes. And so I think as a normal course of business for us, we should really have a look at it and see if there's anything else that we can do to enhance it. That'd
be great. And the open lines of communication that you've had on this one, for me, have been tremendous, and it'd be great too if we're going to study additional areas of the Link and or Red Hill to include the other ward councillors as well, the mountain councillors and the East End, as well as Stony Creek councillors that share these areas in terms of representation. So thanks again for that.
Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I was in the meeting for a while with Councillor Collins and Stephen Cooper and Dave Ferguson. I want to thank Stephen and Dave for their leadership in the traffic department and their availability always. Could I just, for the official record, Jeff, just make sure under your subject report that Ward 6 is officially part of, you just got 5 and 9 there, but could I just please, and Andy, for the record, it should be 6 included. So a lot of the that darkened area, if you will, Mr. Chairman, anybody that's coming from west to east along the Link and or coming off Dartnell Road northbound to get onto the top of Red Hill, once you come off Dartnell, as you're approaching the Mudstone Church exit ramp, there's a really dark area there that is difficult to negotiate as cars are merging and or merging back off onto Mud and Stone Church. So up in my area there, that's really an area of concern. I've heard from many a motorist about negotiating, especially in the evenings and in the wee hours of the morning. There's literally zero lighting along that stretch, and of course going down into Red Hill. Now maybe that was by design, kind of respectful of the environmental area of the valley where the road was built, but I don't want to lose sight of this as well. Like Councillor Collins and Councillor Clark, the three of us kind of border this area of concern, Mr. Chairman. So I appreciate staff's time. I'll leave it with the expertise of the in-house department to further keep this on the radar, and again, just officially, Andy, to include Ward 6 for any future correspondence. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
Even though it might be located in those particular wards, I mean, the complaints are coming from the motorist, and the motorists impact pretty well citywide, and probably even as far as Lancaster. So from my perspective, I think we all should be copied, because we hear from our constituents who utilize the expressway on a very frequent basis. The other piece is, I wouldn't mind, and I don't know, maybe have to go for the clerks, could we not at least, on the lighting piece, we talked about, revisiting it and so forth, but is it something to be prudent to leave on an outstanding list for a future discussion and a future date?
We can have that discussion. We come to item 11.1, which is the removal of it from the outstanding business list. There's actually a motion coming for us on 11.1.
Well, this report answers a chunk of it. It's just the lighting piece that's still, according to this report, at this time, they don't think it's appropriate because of environmental concerns. We clearly heard from this table that is still a concern from the number of councillors sitting around this table, okay. And we don't want to lose sight of it. And my concern is that by not leaving it on the outstanding list, Mr. Chair, just that component.
I just suggest to you, Councillor, you're out of order with it now, because it's on the agenda for 11.1A2.
Okay.
So bring it up then if it's an issue for you. Okay, we have the motion. It's been duly moved and seconded, I think, Mr. Clerk, hasn't it? Okay, all in favor?
Carried.
Opposed? That motion carries. Okay, let's move on to item, there's no motions. We have two. Oh, you have a motion or notice of motion?
Well, it's a...
Deal with an issue from today? Come back to your notices then.
Thank you.
So we have no motions, and we have two notices of motions, which one from Ward 11 and one from Ward 13, which will come back, I guess, next meeting as a motion. Yeah, correct? And then unless someone wants to move to waive the rules, if not, we'll move on. I know, Councillor Duvall, you have a motion you want to waive the rules on?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. On 10.2, this is on behalf of Councillor Powers, where timing is very important, so I asked to waive the rules.
Okay, so motion to waive the rules on 10.2. All in favor? Carried. That was seconded by Councillor Jackson, by the way. So there is 10.2 is before you then. Any discussion on it? Seeing none, all in favor?
Carried.
Okay. Councillor Collins, you have a notice of motion?
Mine's sort of time sensitive. It's I'll explain the situation first and then put my motion. Essentially, I have a two community safety zones, the school safety zones that are being implemented in my ward. I have 2 schools that are surrounded by 3 residential streets. Staff are in the process, as per our delegated authority, to implement school safety zones on these 3 streets. But the 40-kilometer speed reduction does not take into account the entire road. It's only the blocks that are adjacent to the schools. And so essentially I have 3 streets where we're going to introduce 40 kilometers an hour, and I have small portions of each of those streets that will be excluded from it because they do not border the school. So I know that as soon as those signs are put in, the rest of the residents of those streets are going to call me and say, why did one area of this street get 40 kilometers and we're still at the regular speed limit? So to erase any confusion that might exist once those signs were posted, I was going to present a motion today that says that staff be directed to reduce the speed limits to 40 kilometers an hour on Dover Drive, Greenford Drive, and Cromwell Crescent in concert with the installation of school safety zones. Essentially, it would include a little bit, some additional geography to avoid any confusion with the residents as to why this is happening. So that would be my motion. If there is merit today in moving that, then I would move to waive the rules, introduce it as a motion, and subsequently move it as a motion.
Okay, moved by Collins, seconded by Whitehead. If you turn off your microphone, Councillor Whitehead, to waive the rules. So motion to waive the rules first. All in favor? Carried. Opposed? That carries. So Councillor Collins, you're placing your motion then. I think you've read it out. Does anybody want it reread? Okay, is there a second to Councillor Collins' motion? Councillor Jackson, discussion on it? All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Let's move on to item 11.1. So item F, coordination of street furniture, we will not be removing that from the outstanding business list because it's been referred back from staff. So there is one item, which is item C, the Red Hill Parkway improvements that staff will recommend be removed from the outstanding business list. What's your wish? Councillor Collins, you moving it? So what is the motion then to remove item C, Red Hill Parkway improvements from the outstanding business list? So Councillor Collins has moved that. Is there a seconder to that? Okay, so you to the clerk.
If you desire to remain on the OBL, just leave it on the.
Should we narrow it down
OBL.
to the lighting part then?
Okay, you can provide that direction, and that's fine.
Okay, do you need a motion for that, Mr. Clerk, or can you take it as direction to revise it to the lighting?
You could do a motion on that.
Okay, so moved by Whitehead on the lighting, seconded by Jackson. As an amendment, all in favor? Carried. Now to the original motion, remove the original one. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. We have five items requiring revised due dates. Can I have a motion on all of them? Councillor Duvall.
Chair, just on item V, you were asking for another 3-month extension from, it's already been 3 months. Is there a reason for that?
One,
this is the access to the private garage from Bowles Lane. Delegation came in here.
That's Roman numeral 5 then.
Right.
And what's your question?
Well, they're asking for another extension to March the 17th, 2014. Just asking for the reason why.
Okay, Jerry,
Hi, through you, Mr. Chair. We've had some issues with the title search and the underlying records on this file. They're proving to be a lot more complex than we thought. We're back into the original title books, looking through that. The historic review of the site, including the access to the lane, and then when we built the access, there was a fair bit of road reconfiguration at the time, and we're just making sure the status of the road and the lane through that process that we don't lose it, and we're working with legal.
Okay, thanks, Gordon. So it's just trying to get the title, getting it back to the original information that I was trying to find out for 3 years now, and nobody can seem to get it from me. So, understandable, and thank you. I agree with it.
So, Councillor Duvall, do you want to move them all then? All the extended times. Seconded by Councillor Whitehead. Discussion on it. All in favor? Carried. Is there any other items of general information? Seeing none, then I think we need a motion to adjourn. Moved by McCaddy, seconded by Pasuda. All in favor? Carried. So
back to the session.